What if saving a stranger's life changes yours forever? An 11-year-old boy struggling to fit in makes an unexpected decision to help a man on the brink of death. But what he doesn't know is that his act of kindness will lead him into a world of wealth, power, and dark secrets. As he navigates his new life, the line between right and wrong becomes blurry. Can he stay true to himself, or will he lose everything in the pursuit of success? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love this story, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss any updates. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in Macon, Georgia. The kind of day where the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. Jaden Harris, an 11-year-old boy, had just finished his chores and was walking down the familiar cracked sidewalks of his neighborhood. His mother, Kiana, had asked him to pick up some groceries from the local store. It was the kind of errand that, in their small town, never seemed like much, just another ordinary task in a life that had always been ordinary. But Jaden wasn't ordinary. He wasn't someone who liked the status quo, nor was he someone who felt like he belonged. There was a quiet struggle in him, a longing to step out of the life his mother had fought so hard to provide, to see something different than the worn-out streets and faded houses. But for now, it was just the grocery store, just another Saturday. As he walked, lost in his thoughts, Jaden's pace slowed. He heard the sound of rustling leaves and, out of the corner of his eye, saw a man stumbling through the trees at the edge of the wooded area behind the town's park. He was tall, dressed in hiking gear, and had a look of distress on his face. At first, Jaden thought little of it. Maybe the man was lost or just tired from his hike. But then the man collapsed, falling to his knees with a sharp gasp. Jaden froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Without thinking, he ran toward the figure, his sneakers hitting the ground with urgency. When he reached the man, he saw the cause of his distress, a long coiled snake lying just a few feet away, its venomous fangs still visible. The man, his face pale and clammy, had been bitten. Jaden's mind raced. He had learned about snake bites in the survival guides his mother had shown him. He knew that in the woods, every second counted. There was no time to waste. Without hesitation, he knelt beside the man and quickly assessed the situation. "Hey, stay with me," Jaden said, his voice more confident than he felt. He tied a cloth around the man's leg to slow the venom spread and reached into his backpack to grab the first aid kit he always carried with him, just in case. His heart raced, but he kept his focus. He'd seen enough in the past to know that fear couldn't help anyone. His hands worked quickly, expertly. The man groaned, barely conscious, but Jaden didn't stop. He applied pressure to the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. "You're going to be okay," he reassured him, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. But it was all he could say. Minutes seemed to stretch on forever as Jaden waited, his breath shallow, watching the man's condition carefully. Finally, Jaden felt the man's pulse steady beneath his fingertips. He wasn't out of the woods yet, but he was still alive. That was when Jaden heard the sound of voices, people searching for the lost hiker. The moment he had been dreading had arrived. Jaden had helped save a life, but he didn't want to be noticed. He couldn't let anyone see him, especially someone like this man. So without a word, Jaden slipped into the shadows of the trees, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. From the distance, he heard the man being helped up, his voice weak but thankful. Jaden stayed hidden, watching from afar, before finally turning and heading home. His heart was still racing, but as the adrenaline faded, he realized something that made his stomach tighten. He had saved the life of a man he didn't even know, and he had done it alone. Jaden had barely managed to push the events of the afternoon out of his mind when the knock on the door came. It was just another typical evening at home. Kiana was finishing up dinner, the scent of her homemade stew filling the small apartment. Jaden, still lost in thought about the man he had saved, wasn't expecting much. His mom, ever the realist, was more concerned with making ends meet than with any dramatic heroics. But when he opened the door, standing there in the dimming light was a man he had only seen in fleeting moments earlier, the man he had saved in the woods. "Are you Jaden Harris?" the man asked, his voice deep and slightly raspy. His face was still pale, but his eyes were bright, sharp. He looked different now, more composed, with a faint trace of gratitude behind his gaze. Yes, I'm Jaden, he replied, still confused. You're the guy I helped. From the snake bite? The man nodded, stepping forward. He looked around, then back at Jaden. I owe you my life, son. I don't know how I can ever repay you, but I have something in mind. Before Jaden could respond, the man continued, introducing himself as Charles Williams, a name Jaden vaguely recognized from TV and newspapers. Charles was the owner of several luxury businesses in the area, someone who seemed like an unreachable figure to someone like Jaden. Listen, Charles said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion still lingering in his features. What you did today was beyond incredible. It's not every day that someone is willing to risk everything to help a stranger. I want to offer you something, an opportunity to change your life. My company has a scholarship program that can give you the education and resources to build a future far beyond what you could imagine in a place like this. Jaden stood there, still processing the magnitude of the offer. A scholarship? For what? Why him? Charles seemed to read his confusion. It's not just any scholarship, Jaden. I want to sponsor your education at St. Andrew's Academy, the best private school in the state. You'll have access to everything you need, the best teachers, the best facilities, a future where you can do anything you want. The words hung in the air, almost too much for Jaden to grasp. He had always wanted more than the struggles his family faced, more than the constant reminders of how far behind he always felt compared to the rich kids at school. But this felt like a dream, something far too grand for someone like him. I don't know, Jaden stammered. I mean, you're talking about something I could never afford, but my mom, she doesn't like handouts. She's proud of how we've made it on our own. Charles softened, his expression warm with understanding. I'm not asking you to take a handout. I'm offering a partnership. You have potential, Jaden. I see it in you. I want to give you the chance to grow, to show the world what you're capable of. It's not charity. It's an investment in you. Jaden felt his heart race, a mix of excitement and hesitation swirling inside him. This was everything he had ever wanted, a way out, a way to prove himself, a way to make something of his life. But at the same time, a voice in his head reminded him of what he had always been taught. Don't accept anything you didn't earn. The silence stretched on, and Charles, sensing Jaden's hesitation, added, You don't have to decide right now, but think about it. I'll leave my number and you can let me know when you're ready. As the man turned to leave, Jaden stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing. That night, over dinner, Jaden tried to explain the offer to Kiana, but his words stumbled out in a jumbled mess, failing to convey the weight of what had just happened. Kiana listened quietly, her face unreadable, until she finally spoke. Jaden, she began, her voice soft but firm. You've worked hard for everything we have. You've never been the type to expect help from anyone. But this isn't just about us. This is about your future. This could be your chance to get away from here, to build a life that's yours. Jaden felt a surge of emotion at his mother's words. He knew she was right. She had worked so hard to get them by, always making sacrifices for him. But the weight of what she was asking him to do, accept help, let someone else decide his path, felt heavy, almost too much to bear. I don't know, Mom, Jaden murmured, his voice filled with doubt. It feels wrong, like I'm not earning it. Kiana reached across the table, placing a hand on his. Sometimes, Jaden, you have to accept help to build a future. The world's not fair, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a chance when it's offered. Just remember that no matter where you go or what you do, you have to stay true to who you are. That's what matters most. Jaden thought about it long into the night. The next day, he made the decision. He called Charles Williams and accepted the scholarship. The decision felt like a leap of faith, one that could change everything. Jaden's first day at St. Andrew's Academy felt like a blur. As he stepped through the tall iron gates, a part of him was overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of the place. Marble statues lined the walkways, the green lawns perfectly manicured, and the building itself, a sprawling Gothic structure, loomed in the distance like something out of a movie. Everything about it screamed wealth, privilege, and a world that Jaden had never known. He looked down at his uniform, his new crisp blazer and khaki pants, feeling out of place. His sneakers, once his pride and joy, now seemed like a reminder of everything he didn't belong to. The other students walked past him, talking in low voices, their heads held high as if they owned the world. It was as if the entire school was a stage, and Jaden was the outsider, unsure of his lines. His first class was history, and as he entered the room, every eye seemed to turn toward him. He was used to being the center of attention at his old school, but this felt different, uncomfortable. The whispers started almost immediately. "Who's the new kid? Is he on a scholarship?" Jaden kept his head down, trying to ignore the murmurs. He found an empty seat at the back of the room, hoping to go unnoticed. The teacher, Mr. Patterson, introduced him briefly, and the class continued. Jaden's mind wandered as he tried to follow along. The lesson was about European history, something he'd never really paid attention to before. At his old school, history meant the story of survival, surviving the day, surviving the neighborhood. Here it felt like everything was about the past, about things he couldn't relate to. During lunch, Jaden sat alone at a small table in the cafeteria. The cafeteria was bustling with groups of students, all laughing, chatting, and eating together in their exclusive little circles. Jaden felt like a fish out of water. He picked at his food, trying to keep his eyes on his tray, but he couldn't help glancing around. Everyone seemed so confident, so sure of themselves, while he felt small and invisible. "You're the new kid, right?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. Jaden looked up, startled. Standing in front of him was a girl with bright blonde hair, wearing a designer sweater and jeans that looked like they cost more than his entire wardrobe. Her eyes were kind, but inquisitive, as if she were studying him. "Yeah," Jaden replied, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Jaden." "I'm Emily," she said, sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I saw you in history. You're on the scholarship, right?" Jaden nodded. He had nothing to hide, but it felt weird to have it pointed out so bluntly. "Yeah, I guess so." "You don't look like the type of guy who'd end up here," Emily remarked. Her tone wasn't unkind, just curious. "I mean, it's a big jump from where you were, huh?" Jaden shrugged. "It's different, a lot different." She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "You're probably not used to the whole rich kid thing, huh? People here can be a little full of themselves." Jaden felt a small sense of relief. She wasn't judging him. "Yeah, a little." "You'll get used to it," Emily said, her voice gentle. "It's not all bad. Some of us actually don't care about all that stuff." Jaden looked at her, trying to read her. "Thanks." As lunch went on, Emily made small talk, and Jaden found himself relaxing a little. It was strange to have someone reach out to him in this new world, but he appreciated it. He wasn't sure if she was just being polite or if she actually wanted to be friends. But for now, it was enough. The next few weeks were a constant battle for Jaden. In class, he struggled to keep up with the advanced material. His classmates seemed to grasp things so easily, and Jaden often found himself feeling embarrassed when he didn't know the answer to questions that seemed so simple to them. It wasn't that he was dumb, he was smart, but the context was so different. His old school had never taught things the way they did here. His mind kept drifting back to the streets of Macon, to the gritty reality he had left behind. At lunch, the same cycle repeated. Emily would sit with him sometimes and they'd talk, but there was always the undercurrent of difference between them. Emily was a part of this world of privilege and perfection, while Jaden was still trying to figure out where he fit in. One afternoon after class, Jaden found himself standing outside the administration building, unsure of what to do next. He had a few hours before his next class, and he didn't want to spend it wandering the halls like a lost soul. As he stood there, staring at his phone, someone called his name. "Hey, Jaden." He looked up and saw Ryan, a tall, athletic kid from his history class, walking toward him. Ryan was one of the popular kids, and Jaden had noticed him talking to the other students during class. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Ryan asked, his expression casual but with a hint of curiosity. Jaden nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't sure what this was about, but he followed Ryan as he led him toward a bench near the school's tennis courts. "So," Ryan began, sitting down and patting the spot next to him. "You're the new scholarship kid, right? Thought I'd introduce myself." Jaden sat down hesitantly. "Yeah, I'm Jaden." "I'm Ryan," he said with a smile. "Listen, man, I just wanted to let you know people here, especially the ones who've been here a while, can be a little judgmental. But if you want to fit in, you've got to play the game. Don't stand out too much, you know?" Jaden raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't make people uncomfortable," Ryan said, shrugging. "People here like their world just the way it is. If you don't belong, they'll notice. So, you've got to act like you do, even if you don't feel like you do." Jaden nodded slowly, trying to process Ryan's words. It wasn't advice he had ever expected to hear. The idea of pretending to be something he wasn't made him uneasy. But Ryan was right. He had already felt the subtle exclusion, the way people looked at him differently. "I'll keep that in mind," Jaden said, his voice quiet. As he walked back to his next class, Jaden felt a heavy weight settle on his chest. Ryan's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the difficult path ahead. He wasn't just trying to fit in anymore. He was trying to survive in a world that didn't seem made for him. And for the first time since he'd stepped foot on this campus, Jaden wasn't sure if he was strong enough to pull it off. Jaden's life at St. Andrew's Academy continued to feel like a constant battle between two worlds. Each day he navigated the polished hallways, trying to avoid the whispers and subtle looks that followed him. Emily was kind, but their interactions remained limited to polite conversations between classes. Ryan's advice echoed in his mind. Don't stand out too much. Jaden was trying, but it wasn't easy. Every glance from his classmates reminded him of how different he was, how much he still had to learn to fit in. But the hardest part of his new life was being around Charles Williams, the man who had saved him, and whom he had saved in return. Jaden admired Charles, or at least he had once. But the more he spent time with him, the more he realized there were cracks in the facade of the life Charles presented. The perfect businessman, the philanthropist, was hiding something, and Jaden could feel it. It was during a meeting in Charles's office, one that Jaden had reluctantly agreed to attend, that he first caught a glimpse of the man behind the mask. "Jaden, I want you to understand something," Charles said, leaning back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled together. "I didn't get here by being nice. I got here by making tough choices." Jaden listened, trying to focus on the conversation, but something about the way Charles spoke unsettled him. He had always seen Charles as the man who had given him a chance, the man who had changed his life. But now, sitting across from him in a sleek office with expensive art on the walls, Jaden began to sense that there was more to Charles's success than just hard work and generosity. Charles shifted in his chair, his tone turning more somber. "People like me, people who've built something from nothing, we do things others won't. We take risks, we step on people, and we make a lot of enemies." Jaden's heart raced. He wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but the words felt heavy, like a warning. Charles's eyes met his, as if waiting for Jaden to understand something. "I'm not proud of everything I've done, Jaden," Charles continued, his voice low. "But I've always made sure to win, and sometimes that means you have to make deals with people who aren't exactly good." Jaden blinked, unsure of how to respond. He had always assumed that Charles's success was built on kindness and generosity, the kind of idealized figure he had once dreamed of becoming. But now, sitting across from him, Jaden couldn't help but feel a growing discomfort. There was a darkness lurking beneath Charles's polished exterior, a shadow that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Later that evening, after the meeting ended, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He spent the next few days avoiding Charles, unsure of how to process the conversation. The image of Charles as the benevolent benefactor he had come to admire had been shattered. Now, Jaden was left with the unsettling realization that the man who had given him everything might not be the hero he once thought. It wasn't until a week later that Jaden stumbled upon the truth. He was sitting in the library browsing through some of the books on the shelves when his eyes fell on a magazine article tucked behind a stack of old newspapers. The headline caught his attention: Charles Williams, the rise and fall of a business tycoon. His heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, he grabbed the magazine and began flipping through the pages. What he found inside shocked him. The article detailed a series of shady business deals that Charles had been involved in over the years. Deals that had ruined lives, driven people to bankruptcy, and left families in the dust. There were mentions of lawsuits, corporate espionage, and bribery, all things Jaden never imagined could be linked to the man who had saved his life. The most damning part of the article described a controversial merger between one of Charles's companies and a rival corporation. It was alleged that Charles had used underhanded tactics to pressure the rival company's executives into selling, and that several key players had mysteriously disappeared in the process. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. Jaden sat back, the magazine trembling in his hands. The admiration he had once felt for Charles was replaced by confusion and anger. The man who had appeared to be a savior, a symbol of success and opportunity, had built his empire on the backs of others suffering. Jaden didn't know what to do with this information. He wasn't sure if he could ever look at Charles the same way again. But he couldn't deny the truth that was now before him. Charles Williams, for all his wealth and generosity, had a dark past. And Jaden, the boy who had saved him, was now caught in the crossfire of that past. Jaden's mind raced. He wanted to confront Charles, demand answers, but part of him was afraid. What if Charles denied it? What if Jaden was wrong, but the evidence in his hands was undeniable? Charles had used his position of power to manipulate and control others, and Jaden was now part of that world. As Jaden sat in the library, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He had to decide what to do next. Could he continue to trust the man who had given him everything? Could he still look up to Charles, knowing the truth about his past? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was for sure. Jaden was no longer the boy who had blindly accepted help. He was becoming someone who would question everything, even the man who had changed his life. Jaden spent the next few days trying to process everything he had uncovered about Charles. The article, the dark truth about Charles's past, weighed heavily on his mind. Part of him felt betrayed, unsure of how to reconcile the image of the man who had given him everything with the ruthless businessman he had learned about. He knew he couldn't just ignore it. The truth had changed things, and it was hard to look at Charles the same way again. But the offer still hung in the air, an offer that had the power to change his life in ways Jaden had never imagined. It wasn't long before Charles made another appearance in Jaden's life, this time with a gesture that would leave him speechless. Jaden was walking home from school one afternoon when a sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. He glanced at the car, trying not to show his surprise. The driver rolled down the window, a man in a dark suit with an air of quiet professionalism. "Jaden Harris?" the driver asked politely. "Yes," Jaden replied, still unsure what was going on. "Mr. Williams has arranged for you to be driven to the airport. He wishes to speak with you." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. What was Charles up to now? He had barely spoken to him since their last meeting, and yet here was a personal driver, ready to take him somewhere. There was no time to process, no time to refuse. The driver gestured for Jaden to get in, and before he knew it, they were on their way. As the limousine glided through the streets of Macon, Jaden stared out the window, his thoughts a whirlpool of confusion. The man who had been his savior now felt more like a stranger, someone he wasn't sure he could trust. The wealth, the power. It all seemed so far removed from the life Jaden had known, and yet here he was, on his way to meet with Charles again. But why? What did he want this time? The drive took them to the local airport, a small private terminal tucked away from the commercial flights. Jaden's mind raced as the car came to a halt. He wasn't sure what to expect, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. As they stepped out of the limousine, the driver led Jaden toward a private hangar. Inside, Jaden's eyes widened in disbelief. There, sitting on the tarmac, was a Boeing 737. The plane gleamed under the afternoon sun, its size and sleek design overwhelming Jaden. It wasn't just any plane. It was a symbol of wealth, luxury, and a world Jaden couldn't fathom. Charles was waiting beside the plane, his expression calm but expectant. His voice when he spoke was warm but had an edge to it. "I thought it was time you saw what I'm offering you, Jaden. This plane, this life, it's all here for you if you want it." Jaden stood frozen, unsure of how to react. He had seen private jets before, but this was something else entirely. The plane wasn't just a symbol of luxury. It felt like a reminder of how far removed his life had become from everything he had known. The question that burned in his mind was simple. Why me? Charles stepped closer, sensing the uncertainty in Jaden's eyes. "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to understand something. You saved my life, and I don't take that lightly. I want you to be able to see the world, experience everything it has to offer. There's nothing I wouldn't do to make that happen for you." Jaden's mind was spinning. The plane, the offer, it was more than he had ever dreamed of. But deep down, a voice told him this wasn't just about him. This was about more than a plane ride, more than a scholarship, more than anything he had ever thought he could have. Charles's generosity, it seemed, came with strings attached. "I didn't do it for this," Jaden said quietly, his voice uncertain but firm. "I didn't save you for this, for some kind of reward." Charles's eyes softened for a moment, but the smile never faded. "I know, and that's what makes it all the more meaningful. But that doesn't change the fact that you've earned it, Jaden. And I want to show you a world where your dreams can come true." Jaden stood there staring at the massive plane before him. It was hard to process, hard to believe. Was this really happening? The man who had once been a stranger to him had given him everything, his future, his freedom. And now with this plane, he was offering Jaden a glimpse into a life most people would never see. But the question lingered in his mind. What was the cost? As Jaden stepped toward the plane, a mix of excitement and unease washed over him. This was a dream come true, one he had worked for, dreamed of. But something about it didn't feel right. Could he trust Charles? Could he trust himself to handle this new life, this new world? Charles, seeing the hesitation in Jaden's eyes, stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Take your time, Jaden. You don't have to decide now. But know this is just the beginning. What comes next is up to you." Jaden looked up at Charles, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. As the sound of the engines revved up in the distance, he realized that his life, his real life, was about to begin. But the question remained. Would he be able to stay true to who he was, even as the world around him began to change? The days after stepping off that Boeing 737 were a blur of luxury and confusion. Jaden couldn't escape the image of the massive plane on the tarmac, nor the promise Charles had made to him. It was as though he had been transported to another world, one of pristine hotel rooms, private meetings, and expensive dinners. Yet, despite everything, something about it didn't sit right with him. Jaden found himself back in his new life at St. Andrews, torn between the world he had known and the one Charles had introduced him to. On the outside, it seemed like a dream come true, a chance to be someone important, to leave his past behind and become part of a world that could offer him everything he had ever wanted. But deep inside, Jaden knew that his journey wasn't going to be as easy as Charles made it sound. There was a dark undercurrent to everything, a reality that Jaden wasn't sure he could face. It was on a typical Thursday afternoon that things started to change. Jaden had been spending more time with Emily lately, and their bond had deepened. She had become a reliable friend, someone who understood the pressures Jaden was under, even if she couldn't fully comprehend the struggles he had faced back home. The conversation started casually, as most did between them, but soon turned more serious. They were sitting on the lawn outside the main building, enjoying a rare moment of peace in between classes. Jaden had been trying to open up to Emily, but the words felt too heavy, too much to unload all at once. "I just don't know if I fit in here, Emily," Jaden said, staring out at the manicured lawn. "I can't shake this feeling that it's all too good to be true. like I'm in a dream and I'm not sure how long it's going to last before it all falls apart. Emily turned to face him, concern in her eyes. Jaden, you deserve to be here. You've worked hard, you've earned it. But I get it. It's a lot to adjust to. I mean, you came from a completely different world. Jaden nodded, but the words didn't bring him comfort. Emily's reassurance felt like a thin veil, something that couldn't cover the gnawing doubts inside him. His thoughts kept returning to Charles Williams and the strange feeling he got whenever they spoke. It wasn't just that Charles had saved his life. It was the feeling that there was something Charles wasn't telling him, something that didn't quite add up. A week later, the story broke. Jaden was sitting in the student lounge when a notification popped up on his phone. It was from the Macon Gazette, a small local newspaper he didn't typically read. The headline caught his attention immediately. Business tycoon Charles Williams, under investigation for fraudulent business dealings. His heart skipped a beat. Jaden clicked on the link, his stomach sinking as he read through the article. It was a detailed expose about Charles's business dealings, allegations of corporate espionage, bribes to government officials, and manipulation of the stock market. But the worst part, there were mentions of a disappearance of several employees linked to Charles's companies, the very same kind of tactics Jaden had overheard Charles mention in their earlier conversation. The article painted Charles as a man who had gotten rich through ruthless methods, leaving a trail of broken promises and crushed lives in his wake. It wasn't just corporate missteps, it was a deliberate pattern of behavior that, once again, hinted at something darker than Jaden had ever imagined. The man who had given him everything, the chance at a new life, a new future, was also the man responsible for ruining countless others along the way. Jaden was numb, unable to process the news at first. He didn't want to believe it. After everything Charles had done for him, everything he had offered, could this really be true? The more Jaden thought about it, the more he realized how much he had been blinded by the opportunity. His dreams of escaping his past had clouded his judgment. Charles had given him the world, but what was the cost? Later that day, Jaden couldn't keep his thoughts from spiraling. He went for a walk to clear his head, eventually finding himself at the small park near the school. As he sat on a bench watching the sun begin to set, a voice broke through his thoughts. Jaden, right? He turned and saw Ryan, the popular kid from school, walking towards him with a friendly smile. Jaden had always thought Ryan was a little too eager to make him feel welcome, but today, something in his demeanor seemed different. Yeah, Jaden replied, standing up. What's up? Ryan leaned against the bench, his expression turning more serious. I know you've been having a tough time adjusting. I mean, this place can be overwhelming, right? But you should know Charles Williams isn't the man you think he is. Jaden's stomach dropped. How did Ryan know? He had barely shared his thoughts with anyone about Charles, let alone someone like Ryan. Why do you say that? Jaden asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ryan looked around before lowering his voice. People talk, Jaden. Everyone knows what Charles is really like. You don't get to the top without stepping on people, especially not in his line of work. There are rumors about him, things you wouldn't believe. I'm not saying he's a monster, but let's just say people have gone missing because of him. Jaden felt his blood run cold. Missing. The word hung in the air between them like a dark cloud, and for the first time, Jaden wondered if he had been swept up in something far larger and more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. Ryan's eyes softened. You don't have to trust me, Jaden, but you should be careful. People like Charles, they don't just give without expecting something in return. Jaden stood in stunned silence, his mind racing. Everything he had thought he knew about Charles was unraveling before his eyes. He had saved the man's life, and now he was beginning to understand the true cost of that favor. Was he part of something he couldn't escape from? Could he still trust Charles? As Jaden walked back to campus, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The snake bite that had once seemed like a twist of fate now felt like the beginning of a much darker journey, one that could change everything he had come to believe about his future. The news about Charles Williams weighed on Jaden like an anchor tied to his chest. The more he thought about it, the the more it seemed like the world he had been thrust into was built on a shaky foundation. He had admired Charles, respected him, but now everything felt like a lie. The man who had saved his life had built his empire by destroying others, people who had been victims of corporate greed, manipulation, and even fear. Jaden had seen glimpses of this darkness, and now it was impossible to ignore. But even as the world around him crumbled, Jaden could feel something shifting inside him. The more he wrestled with the idea of heroism, what it meant and who truly deserved that title, the more he realized that being a hero wasn't about the people you helped or the things you did for others. It was about what you stood for, even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. Jaden's mind kept returning to the lessons his mother had taught him, the values that had kept him grounded in a world that often felt unfair. He had always believed that heroes were the people who helped others selflessly, without expecting anything in return. But now, after everything that had happened, he realized that true heroism came not from what you received, but from what you were willing to stand up for, even when it meant losing everything. The days after the revelation about Charles were a blur. Jaden withdrew from his usual routine at school, spending more time alone, trying to process everything. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head, caught in a world where power and money spoke louder than truth and integrity. But as the weight of Charles's secrets pressed on him, Jaden realized that he couldn't just sit back and ignore what was happening. He couldn't turn a blind eye to the wrongs being committed. It was Emily who pulled him out of his spiraling thoughts. She found him one afternoon, sitting on a bench outside the library, his mind lost in the fog of confusion. She sat down beside him, her presence a comfort despite the unease that still lingered between them. "Jaden, I've noticed you've been distant lately," Emily said, her voice calm but insistent. "You don't have to go through this alone. If something's bothering you, you can talk to me." Jaden looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth he carried. He wanted to tell her everything, to open up about the darkness he had uncovered, but he wasn't sure where to start. How could he explain what he had learned without destroying everything he had built since coming here? Instead, he chose to be honest in a different way. "I don't know if I can keep pretending, Emily," Jaden said quietly. "I don't know if I can keep living in this world and ignoring the things that are wrong. I thought I was doing the right thing, getting a better life, a better future, but now I don't know what's right anymore." Emily watched him carefully, her eyes soft with understanding. "It's okay to question things, Jaden. It's okay to not have all the answers, but you don't have to carry this burden by yourself. You have a voice, and you can use it." Her words were a lifeline. Jaden realized that Emily was right. He didn't have to stay silent. He didn't have to let the darkness win. He could speak out, challenge what was wrong, and still be the person he wanted to be. Heroism wasn't about following someone else's lead. It was about forging his own path, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. The next day, Jaden stood in front of his class during the weekly assembly. His palms were sweating, his heart racing, but there was a fire inside him that he couldn't ignore. He had been given a platform, a chance to speak, and he wasn't going to waste it. "Good morning, everyone," Jaden began, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "I'm here today to talk about something that's been weighing on me. I know a lot of you see me as the new kid, the scholarship kid, the one who doesn't quite fit in. But that doesn't matter as much to me anymore. What matters is this: there's more to life than just fitting in. There's more to being a person of value than how much money you have, how many friends you've made, or what kind of car you drive." He paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of his classmates, who were now watching him intently. The real measure of a person comes from what they stand for, the values they live by, the things they believe in, and the actions they take when no one else is watching. I've learned that we can't let the wrongs of the world go unchallenged just because they're hard to face. We can't ignore the truth just because it's inconvenient. Jaden's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't stop. It's easy to be silent. It's easy to let someone else fight the fight for you. But we all have a voice, and if we don't use it, then we're complicit in allowing the world to stay the way it is. We can all make a difference, no matter how small it seems. The room was silent, but Jaden could feel the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't sure if anyone would remember what he had said, but that didn't matter. He had spoken his truth. He had found his voice, and that was the first step toward reclaiming control over his future. As Jaden finished speaking, a wave of emotion washed over him. He had never felt more alive, more connected to the person he was meant to be. He had taken a stand, and in doing so, he had redefined what it meant to be a hero. Jaden's speech at the assembly had been the spark, but it was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of whispers and sideways glances. Some of the students had been inspired by his words, while others viewed him with suspicion, unsure of where he stood in the complex web of power and privilege at St. Andrew's Academy. For Jaden, nothing had been the same since that day. His path forward was uncertain, but the pressure of making a choice had never been more real. After speaking out, Jaden's internal conflict grew stronger. The truth about Charles had shaken him to his core, and now he was faced with a choice that could alter the course of his life. He could continue down the path that Charles had laid out for him, the world of wealth, influence, and privilege, or he could choose a more difficult, less glamorous road that remained true to the values his mother had instilled in him. The weight of this decision pressed on Jaden's chest, a constant reminder that the life he had built, the life he had dreamed of, was tied to a man whose morals and methods were anything but clear. Jaden knew that at some point he would have to confront Charles. He could no longer live in the shadow of someone else's choices. He had to take responsibility for his own future. One afternoon, Jaden was sitting alone in the school's library when he saw Charles Williams walking toward him. Jaden's heart raced as the man stopped in front of his table, his usual smile replaced by a more serious expression. Charles's eyes held a quiet intensity, a mixture of pride and something unspoken. "You've made quite an impression, Jaden," Charles said, his voice calm but tinged with an edge. "I've been keeping an eye on you. I see potential. You're not like the others." Jaden shifted in his seat, his palms sweating. This was the moment he had been dreading. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, Charles, but I need to ask you something that's been bothering me." Charles raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go ahead." Jaden took a deep breath, gathering the courage to voice the questions that had been gnawing at him for days. "I know about your past. I know the things you've done to get to where you are, and I don't know if I can keep standing by you, knowing what I know." Charles's expression hardened, but there was no anger, only a quiet acknowledgement of the tension in the air. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at Jaden, as though sizing him up. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Charles's tone shifted, a hint of frustration creeping in. "You think I'm some kind of villain because I did what I had to do to survive, to get ahead?" Jaden stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't directed at Charles. It was directed at himself for allowing this man to shape his future without fully understanding the consequences. "I don't think you're a villain, Charles. I think you've made choices that hurt people, and that's not the kind of person I want to be." For a moment, Charles remained silent. His eyes narrowed as if weighing Jaden's words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and almost regretful. "You're right, Jaden. I've made mistakes, I've hurt people, but I did it to build something, to make sure I didn't end up where I started with nothing." Jaden's chest tightened as he listened to Charles, but he didn't back down. "I don't want to build my life on the backs of other people. I want to earn my place. I want to make my own choices no matter how hard it is. That's what I've learned." Charles looked at him for a long time, as though considering the weight of Jaden's words. The man who had been so confident, so sure of his power, now seemed uncertain. Finally, Charles sighed and took a step back. "I can't tell you what to do, Jaden," he said quietly, "but I won't force you to stay. If you want to leave, you can. You have that choice. But remember this, the world doesn't always reward people who do the right thing. Sometimes it punishes them." Jaden swallowed hard, the weight of Charles's words hanging in the air. He had been offered the world, a life of comfort, security, and endless opportunities. But at what cost? He knew that he couldn't continue living in the world Charles had built for him, not if it meant sacrificing his values. "I'm not afraid of hard work," Jaden said, his voice steady. "I'm not afraid to build something real, even if it takes longer. I just want to be someone I can respect." Charles nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Then I respect your decision, Jaden. You've got guts. I'll give you that." Jaden turned, walking away from the man who had given him everything but had also asked him to turn a blind eye to the truth. As he left the library, Jaden felt the weight lift off his shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. He wasn't walking in the shadow of someone else's choices anymore. He was walking his own path, ready to face whatever came next. The days following his conversation with Charles were a blur. Jaden had made the decision to stand by his beliefs, to walk away from the life Charles had offered him. And though part of him still wondered if he had made the right choice, there was a growing sense of peace within him. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was his path to carve. No more pretending, no more compromising. It was time to embrace his new reality. It wasn't long before Jaden realized that choosing his own path meant creating something entirely new. He had to build a future that wasn't just about success, wealth, or influence, but one that was rooted in integrity, in helping others, and in making a difference. And that's when it hit him. His journey could be about more than just him. It could be about giving back, about showing others that they too had the power to change their own lives, no matter where they came from. With that realization, Jaden began making plans. He spent hours researching how to start a nonprofit, reaching out to local organizations, and finding ways to give back to his community. His vision was clear. He wanted to create an organization that would help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds get the same opportunities he had been given. He wanted to build a bridge between the world he had left behind and the one he was now part of. He would help them find their own voices, just as he had found his. As Jaden worked tirelessly on his new project, he couldn't help but think about Kiana, his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, who had worked day and night to give him the chance at a better life. She had always taught him the importance of hard work, of staying true to his roots, and of never compromising his values. It was time to make her proud, to show her that everything she had done wasn't in vain. One afternoon, Jaden sat down with Kiana at their kitchen table, a stack of paperwork in front of him. He looked at her with determination, knowing that the next step was the most important one. "Mom," he began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do with all this, with the scholarship, with everything that's happened, and I think I've figured it out." Kiana looked up from the papers she was sorting, a faint smile on her face. "What's on your mind, Jaden?" "I want to start something, a nonprofit, to help kids like me, kids who don't have the same opportunities, the same chances. I want to give them a chance to succeed, to show them that they can make something of themselves, just like I'm trying to do." Kiana's smile grew wider, and her eyes glistened with pride. "You've got the heart for it, Jaden. You always have. If anyone can make a difference, it's you." Jaden felt a rush of emotion as he heard her words. For the first time, he felt like he was truly on the right path. He wasn't just following in someone else's footsteps. He was forging his own way, one that was driven by his own values and the lessons he had learned along the way. With Kiana's blessing, Jaden threw himself into his nonprofit work. He reached out to local schools, community leaders, and businesses to gather support. He organized events to raise awareness and funds, and slowly but surely, his vision began to take shape. He wasn't just a kid who had received a scholarship to an elite school anymore. He was a young man with a mission. But as Jaden's work began to grow, so did the challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when things seemed too big, too overwhelming. There were setbacks and moments when Jaden wanted to give up, but he always remembered what Kiana had told him. You have to keep going no matter how hard it gets. And so Jaden pushed forward, with every failure only making him more determined to succeed. One day, as Jaden was finalizing the details for a big community event, he received an unexpected call. It was from Emily. "Jaden, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "There's a local foundation that's been following your work. They want to partner with you, offer funding and support for your nonprofit. This could be huge." Jaden felt a surge of excitement, but also a sense of disbelief. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious," Emily replied. "This is your chance to take it to the next level, to really make a difference." Jaden couldn't believe it. This was the moment he had been working for, the moment that would validate all of his efforts. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the recognition, the validation that his work mattered, that his dream was becoming a reality. As Jaden stood in front of the room at the next community event, the crowd buzzing with excitement, he looked out at the faces before him, some familiar, some new, and he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This was his new beginning, a beginning where he had created something from nothing, where he had taken the lessons from his past and turned them into something positive. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always fun, but it was real. "This is just the beginning," Jaden said into the microphone, his voice clear and strong. "We're building a future where every child, no matter where they come from, can succeed, and I'm proud to be part of that change." The applause was deafening, and Jaden couldn't help but smile. He had come a long way from the kid who had once stood in the shadows of a stranger's success. Now he was stepping into the light, and he was ready to make a difference.